Good morning. My name is Paul Healy, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Principals Association. The webinar today is to update you on a Senate Bill 1095, which has to do with the graduation requirements in the Keystone exams. The reason why this is so important is we believe that this may come up for a vote in the House within the next week. So there will be a call to action that we're going to be asking you to help us get this across the finish line. But first, I want to review what the Senate Bill 1095 is all about and to talk about those options. So, as you know, the Senate Bill 1095 has to do with the graduation requirements in the Keystone exams. And as you also know, there's been a moratorium on those Keystone exams in algebra, biology, and literature. And legislation has just kicked the can down the road for that graduation requirement. As an organization, we have been outspoken in reference to not using a single test to judge a student, a school, a teacher, a principal, and a district. So this comes as welcome news that we now are proposing a bill that will have multiple pathways for students to get a diploma. Also, I do want to say that during my 6 years here as the executive director, this is the first time as an organization that we've been at the table drafting a piece of legislation rather than just responding to it. And when I say we, I want to say that collectively, the educational organizations have been at the table looking at these pathways and providing our input as well as language. Those organizations have been ourselves as the Principals Association, the Superintendents Association, the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, and PSEA. So let's look at the options. There are 5 options that hopefully will be proposed with this piece of legislation. And I can't promise that these will be the exact things, but it will be close to these. So, of course, the first option that's not on the list here is that a student passes the 3 Keystone exams at the proficient level, and then they're done. You don't have to look at any of the 4 options. However, if a student cannot do that, then we look at some other options. And option 1, we look at a composite score for the Keystone exams. So a student would have to meet the 3 Keystone exams and perform at least 1 proficient and 2 basic on those Keystone exams. PDE would recommend those cut scores for those composite scores and get approval from the State Board of Education. The rationale behind this option is that if a student may be very good in one area, but maybe weak in the other 2, or strong in 2 and weak in 1. So this gives a student an opportunity to look at their performance over the 3 of them with a composite score. So if a student can still not meet that graduation requirement to get their diploma, then we keep going across the table, and now we look at option 2. And I will say for the rest of the options, option 2, 3, and 4, they have to meet the local grade requirements in the district, as well as some of these other things. So in option 2, we have multiple things that can help a student get their diploma. For example, the first one is they could substitute an AP or an IB exam for each of the content area in which they did not perform proficient. So an example would be if I scored basic on biology and I still didn't meet the composite scores on the other ones, and if I'm taking an AP course or an IB exam, I could substitute that. Now you may be thinking, that doesn't make a lot of sense. How many students would really be in this category if they can't outright score proficient on the 3 Keystones, and they can't do it by the composite? How many of them are really going to be in an AP exam or an IP course or exam to substitute that? And the only student I can think of that could be in this category would be a kid that would just blow off all 3 Keystone exams saying these don't matter to me, and then realize that they're not going to get their diploma because they blew off the Keystones, and they could be in AP courses and substitute that. The second option under there would be the SAT, the PSAT, or the general test. So they can substitute one of those tests with the score, again, recommended by PDE and approved by the state board. Another option is the ASVAB. which is the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery. As you know, many of our students do go into the military and sit for that test. There will be a cut score for that. And as you know, there are different sections of that test. There's math, literature, and some science involved in the ASVAB. Another one is admission to a 4-year nonprofit higher education with evidence to enroll. And again, the theory behind this is that we should look at a kid's whole career, the whole child, their whole K-12 experience and what they did, which is reflected on their transcript. So if they can get into a 4-year college based on their transcript, which, by the way, usually includes sitting for an SAT as well, then that should be able to stand on its own. Another one is successful completion of a pre-apprenticeship program or a passing grade in a credit-bearing dual enrollment in either math, science, or English. And again, it doesn't have to be an algebra course, but it has to be a math course, a science course, or an English course in dual enrollment. And the final option under option 2 is the ACT Work Key Certificate. And if a student sits for those exams, as you know, there are color-coded scores for that. And for option 2, they would have to get a score at the gold level. And again, so in option 2, there are multiple pathways. And again, the reasoning behind this, as you know, that some kids just are not test takers. So we have to look at other ways to help them enter their career at the end of their K-12 experience. So let's move to option 3. Option 3 is pretty easy, and you're familiar with this. This is for your CTE concentrators. So they would meet the local grade requirements, plus the additional CTE evidence of readiness. That's already been proposed, as you know, and it's in law as far as Act 6 of 2017. And then finally, option 4. Option 4 is probably the most confusing, and you have to think of it as 2 tiers. So again, a student, if they could not meet the graduation requirements for the other options, you would look at option 4. So again, they would have to meet their local established grade-based requirements and present 3 pieces of evidence for their readiness for graduation. And it also has to relate to their post-secondary plans. However, those 3 pieces of evidence have to come from 2 different tiers, with 1 piece of evidence is required from tier 1. So what's in tier 1? Admission to a non-4-year nonprofit higher education. So instead of just 4-year, they could be a community college as well, and evidence to enroll. You can also substitute an SAT instead of the whole SAT exam, now a subject-specific exam. An industry-recognized credential. Again, the ACT Work Key Certificate, but now it's below the gold level cut score. And then also any AP or IP exam. You may remember in option 2, it had to be in math, science, or English as a substitute, but now you can use any one. And then any credit-bearing dual enrollment or post-secondary course. That's in tier 1. One of the pieces has to come from there or more. And then the other 2 pieces of evidence may come from tier 2 or come from tier 1. A Keystone exam, any Keystone exam at the proficient or advanced level, so you can look at one of those. Full-time enrollment as related to their career plans. Successful completion of an internship, externship, or a co-op. Other dual enrollment or post-secondary courses that are non-math, non-English. So those are the options that are being proposed in Senate Bill 1095. I will add one other thing. So what happens if a student cannot fall into any of those options? And there may be some of those students. Well, in the present law, there's a waiver at 10% that a superintendent can waive graduation requirements to no more than 10% of the students. And by the way, I should mention for special education students, their IEP goals cover them, and that's their graduation requirement. So if anybody cannot meet those options and they're not fall into the IEP realm, the 10%, because of all the options now, would be reduced to 5%. So there'd be a 5% waiver for a district to use for students that don't meet those options. However, there are some things that come with that 5%. So if for example, if a student would exceed the 5% waiver, it could trigger an action plan that would be developed by PDE, and PDE approves for the district. If a district exceeds the 5% waiver for 2 years in a row, for example, it may come to a PDE audit so that they look at your curriculum, your standards, and your assessments to make sure that all kids are meeting the standards and have opportunities to fit into the other options. So that is Senate Bill 1095. As I said, it passed the Senate unanimously back in June. So today, as a matter of fact, the House Education Committee will be examining Senate Bill 1095, and we're hoping it's going to come out of committee and be put to the House vote very, very shortly. As most of you know, they're back in session for a very brief period of time this fall before they hit the road for the election term that's coming up. So we need your help in getting Senate Bill 1095 across the finish line. So we urge you to contact your House legislators now and tell them to support Senate Bill 1095. This is a huge win for our students, a huge win for our schools, and a huge win for school districts across the Commonwealth. Finally, we will have something that is not just test dependent, but looks at other ways that a child can fulfill their dreams to move on to post-secondary, either in their career or to the college level or to the military. So I want to thank you for your support and cooperation, and I hope you will join us in supporting Senate Bill 1095. Thank you.